Is it necessary to be hit or abused verbally? The most painful is when everyone thinks that person is not capable to hurt us, but they don't know we're suffering a lot.
That's right. It's those invisible wounds that are most painful. And it makes you feel all the more isolated, because you have this charming person. Everybody thinks you're with a catch, right? And it's funny for me, my grandmother would say to me, "Oh, you can tell he loves you a lot." Or, "Oh, but he brings you flowers," right?
Yeah.
And it was until someone said to me, "You can buy your own flowers." Right. And that's what really clicked in my head.
This is Emily Harmon, host of the Onward Podcast, and I want to give a heads up to my Onward Podcast listeners. Number one, I appreciate you. Thank you very much for listening to the Onward Podcast. And number two, I wanted to let you know that starting in January of 2022, I started to call my live show Onward Live, and I changed the theme. It's about creating a life you love living now. I'm going to publish the Onward Live episodes under the Onward Podcast brand. So this is part of the transition. This episode was recorded back in the fall of 2021. And I have a few more episodes like this to publish. They were recorded live as the Onward Podcast. Pretty soon, though, we will transition to all Onward Live episodes being broadcast under the Onward Podcast brand. No worries, I'm still going to bring you awesome guests and awesome interviews. Conducting these interviews is one of my most favorite things to do. I learn from every single guest, and I hope you do too. Let's cut to the interview.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the live version of the Onward Podcast. I'm excited to be here today. This is kind of like a special episode. Let me take this banner off. A special episode with my guest, Sonia Frontera. And when I met with her, we decided this time of year is a really good time to have this discussion. Just with the holidays coming up and a lot of stress, people are under stress, and just making people aware of domestic violence, because with the statistics, and I'm sure we'll get into that when I bring Sonia on, I'm sure that every one of us knows somebody who is in that situation or was in that situation, and I'm one. And so we'll be talking about that tonight. And when I was at the gym this morning, I noticed someone said, "It's 6 December. And I'm like, oh my gosh, today is the 30-year anniversary of the day I married my children's father, who was verbally abusive to me. And so that's why this interview is even more special for me, more interesting for me. And I noticed as I was getting ready, now that I'm not as busy and I feel my feelings more, and I notice, and I have more self-awareness, I noticed I was getting nervous about this interview, not from the standpoint of, conducting an interview being nervous, but just from the standpoint of the topic, because it gets to me sometimes. And I'm sure that Sonia and I will talk about that. So let me bring my guest on. Sonia, welcome.
Thank you, Emily. Thanks for having me.
Did I pronounce it right? Is it Sonia or Sonia? Because I want to make sure.
Sonia.
Sonia. Okay, Sonia. So yeah, I posted a link to your book, and it's free. It's available for a limited time. It's called Stop the Hurt. And the topic of this episode is Stop the Hurt, the truth about domestic violence that everyone needs to know. And I was wondering if you could just introduce yourself a little bit and talk about why this topic is so near and dear to your heart.
Well, yes, I have been involved in domestic violence awareness and advocacy for 28 years now. I realize it's been that long. And I started out when I was in law school, and I started at an internship at the Superior Court of Essex County, where I was going to school at the domestic violence unit. And that was a very eye-opening experience. I I was in an abusive relationship and I didn't realize that it was actually domestic abuse. And that experience led me to really want to help others who are similarly situated. For me, it started when I was 24 years old. I got married, and I realized within 24 hours of the wedding that I had married a psychologically abusive man, that I had made a terrible mistake I did not know at the time how to deal with. And it is a very difficult topic, and it is something that affects 1 in every 4 women and 1 in every 7 men. So anywhere you go, you know that there's somebody who is hurting or has been hurting in an abusive relationship.
Yeah, somebody that you work with, somebody that's in your family. How did you not know when you were getting married that you were marrying into that? She
You know what?
asked because she was in the same position.
Yeah, I mean, it's not unusual because the abusers tend to be very charming and put you on a pedestal. And sometimes they make their moves when they know they have a grip on you. And in my case, I am Catholic, a very religious girl who was raised to get married and stay married. And I think he realized at the time that, I said I do in a church, I was trapped. And that being a very religious person, that I was not going to divorce. And that was a theme that kept coming up, during our relationship. Well, you can't divorce me. You're Catholic.
Wow. Wow. And was it verbal abuse or emotional abuse? I mean, when you talk about domestic violence, sometimes people tend to think, hitting, punching. There's more than that.
Absolutely. Yes. And in my case, he became verbally abusive on the plane. And he told me everything is going to change on our way to the honeymoon. He just says, you know what, everything is going to be different now. And I just cried all the way to Mexico. He just kept on saying all kinds of horrible things to me. And, I didn't know what to do. And it is something that in a way I'm grateful it happened that way, because very often abusive partners just start chipping away at your confidence little by little. Whereas I kind of knew that something was amiss and that I made a terrible mistake. I didn't know what to do about it at the time, but I realized that this marriage was not what I had signed up for, and I didn't see it coming because he was very loving, very attentive until, the wedding.
Wow. So how long were you married?
Almost 7 years.
Okay. So yeah, that's another topic we want to talk about, right? Is like you knew it from day one. And then you've got this other piece of you that's like, well, I'm Catholic and we're supposed to stay married. So why did you stay for 7 years? That's something that people have a hard time understanding.
I know it is very difficult for anyone who has not been in an abusive situation to understand. And it's different for everyone. For me, I'm from Puerto Rico. My family was in Puerto Rico. I did not have the support systems I needed to get out of the relationship. And one thing that I say to anyone who's in an abusive situation is get support, get help, because you feel very isolated, very alienated. And in my case, I felt like I didn't have anywhere to go or anyone to help me. So it took me empowering myself to be able to say, this is it. This is where I draw the line. I'm out of here. And I did that not by design, but it just happened to be that way. I decided to go to law school. I was at a dead end in my career. I had a terrible job at the age of 25. And I said, I can't go on like this. And I decided to go to school. And that kind of opened so many doors, new community of friends, more stimulation. And best of all, it put a barrier between me and my husband. Yeah. So I was working all day. I was going to school at night. So I didn't have to be with him. So that minimized the opportunities for him to be abusive.
So he wasn't the type that would say, I'm not allowing you to go to law school.
That wouldn't have worked, because if he had said that, my family would have been up in arms. My family was really supportive of my going to school and becoming a lawyer. That's something they wanted for me, So I think he realized he couldn't do that.
I'm sorry, I had to sit because I've been going to a trainer and she's killed my legs.
Oh no, get comfy, girl.
can hardly walk. Yeah. So he wouldn't have put up with that. I mean, you wouldn't have put up with that.
No, and my family, and I think he knew my family would have been really, really upset about it and put resistance. So I think that's one of the reasons why he didn't do that.
I had messaged Jenny and said, oh my gosh, and she probably missed the introduction, but at the introduction, Jenny, I said, today's the 30th year wedding anniversary when I married my kid's dad. And there's so many mixed emotions because he was verbally abusive. And I didn't even realize today was the anniversary until earlier today. And then I just noticed I was starting to get kind of nervous about this show because I downloaded Sonia's book and I started reading it, and it just like brought back a lot of memories.
Yeah, it's amazing how you get triggered.
Yeah. So I appreciate you guys being here. So you started to go to law school, and you what was the kind of abuse, the domestic violence? Like, I'm going to ask you some questions that I already know the answer to, but I just want to say, like, why is verbal abuse domestic violence? I mean, it's just saying nasty things. I mean, that's not violent.
And that is one of the myths about domestic violence that needs to be eradicated, because we associate domestic violence with physical violence. And I prefer to use the term domestic abuse because that's more consistent with the realities of abuse, which can range from all kinds of different behaviors, which all center around power and control over the victim. Mm-hmm. So it can be any number of different things, not just physical. It could be financial abuse, which I was surprised to find out is the most common and one of the most powerful forms of abuse. It can be
so what is that? Financial, like not letting you have any money to spend?
It could be a number of different things. Typically is taking over control of the finances, giving you no access to the bank accounts, stealing money from you. It could be limiting your ability to make a living by not letting you go to school or not letting you have a job. Or if you have a job, showing up at your place of employment and starting fights and embarrassing incidents or calling you constantly so you get fired because of all that. So, and it could be a number of different things. It's amazing how creative these guys can be. It can be ruining your credit. It could be, taking your ATM card, and make you beg for money.
Have you watched the show on Netflix It's called Made?
I just started, but I couldn't continue. It triggered me.
Yeah.
I was able to finish
it, but that was a tough show because there's all different kinds of abuse in that show. The financial, he took her car, everything, and she was just so determined. And she didn't have a mom, she didn't have a family support, she didn't have any support.
Right.
And she had a kid, and this guy was, and so that show shows about like women going back and why they go back and
exactly
how they do that. So so Kenneth says financial abuse is abuse, and keeping you away from your family and friends is abuse. Yes.
Right. And actually isolating the victim is the power tool of the abuser, because then you don't have anyone to turn to. And it's very, very common. That is really consistent in all abusive relationships, not just the intimidation, but the isolation from your support.
Yes, definitely. Jenny says, yes, that's why I wrote you. Yeah, and told you it was going to be tough. And got Lygia here from Costa Rica. Thank you for joining us tonight. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to post them for us, and I'll try to catch them and ask Sonia. So, a lot of times I think people think domestic abuse or violence is really man abusing the woman. But you said earlier that 1 in 7 men are victims too.
That's right.
Yeah.
It might be a little different. It may not be necessarily physical. I see it more as very common. The children, using the children as a weapon is something that female abusers do. And it can also be same-sex couples.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So how would somebody know that somebody's in an abusive situation? Because, people may not have known with me. I was really good at hiding it. And the abuse didn't happen around other people. So then you feel like you're crazy.
Exactly. And it's really funny. This woman I was working with, we're just talking about my book, and as we're talking about our respective experiences, it came up that both our husbands would start fights when you were going out to see people, and they would get you all rattled. So when you are out with people, you look like a nut, you're irritable, you're snapping, right? So you look like you're the crazy one while they're putting on the charm, and that is very, very common. you know
Yeah.
they and then people are deceived. They think you're married to a catch, right?
Right.
He's Mr. Nice Guy, and you're the nut. You're just reactive and angry, and so it's hard for people to know that you are in an abusive situation. So one of the giveaways is when somebody has a sudden change in personality. Somebody who's outgoing and friendly and warm suddenly becomes withdrawn, or nervous around the partner, or stays away from you, or cuts the conversation short, doesn't get together with you anymore. So be on the lookout for those signs, because they are very telling. And you have to do the homework. You really have to be the detective here, because, like you said, very often all this abuse takes place outside of the presence of other people.
Well, and like you said, I mean, I knew I was being verbally abused. I would call, I feel so bad for my mom. I would call and complain to her all the time. And then she'd say, like sometimes driving with the kids in the back seat, and I was just so stressed I had to get out of the house. And then a few days later, she'd ask how things are going, and I'd say, fine, everything's fine. I don't know what you're talking about. He changed. Things are different. And it's like
Right.
a cycle.
That's normal. That's called the cycle of violence.
Yeah. Let's see, Heidi says, the constant verbal abuse is insidious. It eats away at your
Exactly.
self-esteem. They will frequently be nice. Yes. That's what I experienced,
Right.
Like you're like waiting for something to happen, and then he's nice. It's like, oh, he's changing.
Right.
Because yeah.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
it's funny because someone I did a program with, she told me that she actually sometimes provoke the situation so she would be relieved from the when is this going to happen? When is the other shoe going to drop? So
Yeah.
she found herself provoking things because she just couldn't take the suspense of not knowing when he was going to turn.
Yeah. And yes. So here's a question. Can religious beliefs be used to keep a person under abusive situation or even a non-desired marriage? Yes. You might have, Lydia might have joined a little late, but go ahead and talk about, yeah.
Absolutely. And I did not know there was a term for it. It's called spiritual abuse. When your partner uses your faith and your religion as a weapon against you to keep you trapped in that marriage. And if you join late, that's what my husband did, because I was Catholic and I couldn't divorce. I struggled with that because I did not want to displease God, but I was absolutely miserable. And I actually found myself wishing he were dead, because that's the only way that as a Catholic woman, I would be able to be free from this relationship.
I would wish that too. I've never said that.
I haven't said it either.
But I would wish that. And
It's
that's
horrible.
the only way that you see to get out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's no way to live. It's very painful.
Yeah. We went to go to counseling, but he was so handsome and
charming.
Yeah. And I always felt like I was the, viewed as the crazy one. How did you end up leaving?
Well, for me, I felt more empowered as time went on, and I worked, and I recommend to anyone, get help. Don't go for couples counseling, because exactly what you said is what happens. They put on the charm. Very often they can take advantage of the therapist and turn the therapist against you. And so I work with a therapist on my own, and he did come to therapist. He got violent with me once, and the therapist said, you do that again, you're going to jail. You see the difference in size between him and you're going to go to jail. Because I'm a very tiny woman. He was a big guy. And working with this woman made me feel safer and empowered, because I knew he couldn't, he probably wouldn't cross that line again.
Yeah.
And as I felt stronger, as I worked with her more and more, I started like not exactly tuning him out, but it didn't have the effect on me that it would have otherwise had if he said something, instead of being something that I took personally and hurtful. Oh, this is the person I love. I feel so hurt that he said that to me or he did that to me. Then I'm like, I don't care. It's like when like a 3-year-old says you're stupid. How do you take it? Right.
Yeah.
So I started taking it that way. So it's like he couldn't push the buttons anymore.
Did that piss him off?
I didn't even notice because I didn't
Okay.
even care.
Okay.
That's how freed I felt,
Wow,
at the
you really
time.
did. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was wonderful. So it got to the point where, as I was my last year of school, my last, I'm thinking to myself, you know what? Do I want to practice law with this man's last name? Do I want to be tied to this person as I start a new life? And it just gave me the perfect chance to start over from scratch on a totally clean slate. And that's when I divorced my last semester in law school.
And how did he fight it, or did
he turned to mush? I think he never expected me to do that, or that I would carry out the decision. And, there was nothing he can do. I was already determined, and he knew what a determined person I am.
Yeah. He says, I'm Catholic. Oh, Heidi says, I'm Catholic too, but 2 family members have gotten annulments with 2 different situations. One was definitely verbally abusive. So there is a way out of a bad marriage.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah. At the time, I didn't know that.
Right.
Divorce were I'm talking 30 years ago. It was very difficult to get an annulment at the time. And, it just got to the point where I said, you know what? I don't need an annulment. I need my freedom.
Yeah.
This is something between me and God.
Well, how would you recommend handling a situation where you have a friend, a male or female, whatever, who's being abused and talks? Well, I guess there's 2 situations. One where they don't say anything and you think that might be happening. How do you approach them? And another where, like, if they did what I did, call and complain all the time, but then just stay. How do you recommend that you handle that as a friend?
Well, as a friend, the most important thing you need to do is let your friend know that you're there for them, that you care, that you believe them, and that you will support them regardless of their decision. And just ask open-ended questions. If you have witnessed the abuse, you can say, I have noticed that your husband does this or that, or your partner does whatever. How do you feel about that? And just get them to start talking. And if they don't want to talk, let them know that if they're ready at some point, they want to talk to you about anything, that you will be there to listen. So, and ask open-ended questions and just make it very clear that you will support them. And you should contact the people who run the domestic violence agencies in your area, so you can learn more about how you can be supportive, and offer them, to accompany them if they need to go to an appointment with the agency or with a lawyer or to the court, so they know that they are not alone and that they are supported, they're being supported. And by all means, never tell them what to do. Yeah. Never tell them to give the partner an ultimatum or that they have to leave them. Everybody has to make that decision and carry them out on their terms.
Yeah, that's true. Dorothy Ann says, this is a great show. Wow. Thank you, Dorothy Ann. And Lydia says, I listened once to a psychiatrist who said, you can't surrender. If you don't struggle for your marriage, then your kids will take the wrong path. You're not praying enough.
You need to learn to listen to your inner voice.
Yes, definitely. I finally left when I saw it impacting my kids. Like I couldn't go for a walk, or they didn't want to be alone with him.
Boy.
He didn't hit them or anything, but it was just like, you're just like on pins and needles because you're going to make a mistake, right? You're not going to load the dishwasher right. You're going to spill your milk. You're going to this or that. And it's just tense all the time. And so I was finally able to leave. I'm very, very fortunate. And it still impacts me today. Just, you can tell I'm getting nervous here, or talking about it. I was getting nervous. And then a few years ago, I was going camping with a boyfriend, and he was backing up the camper, and I had to help steer it, tell him which way to turn and everything. And I just got so stressed. And he's like, Emily, I'm not Bruce. And that was 20 or more years later. So, it still impacts us.
Yeah, it's amazing how it comes up, when you least expect it.
Yeah. Yeah. So a Facebook user says, my sister-in-law was physically abused and denied everything the next day. I struggle with being supportive and not tolerating her husband. It's a hard line to walk to support, but not to enable or condone the behavior. Yes, it is. What would you say to that? Do you have...
And it's not uncommon for the victims to deny the behaviors. It could be out of shame. It could be out of fear of what kind of reprisal the partner's going to take against them. So you need to be very patient. Just let them know that you care, that you will support them, and that you want them to be safe, and that you want them to be happy.
And no, just know that the statistics are, I don't know what they are, but you may know about how many times they go back.
7. It usually takes 7 attempts to get out. That's a big number.
Keep coming back. And one thing that I was very fortunate about is that I had a job and I had the financial means to get out. Some people don't have that.
Yeah.
So
that's why it's so powerful, financial abuse.
Yeah. Yeah. Or even just they're both, they just don't have a lot of money in the marriage at all and they can't get out. But that's why it's so important, the work that you do, because you volunteer and you support domestic abuse survivors, don't you? You do that. And then you're also a divorce attorney, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So what are the kinds of things you see when people are in this situation and they want to get a divorce, but it's scary?
It is scary. It is always scary. It's not something that you do on a whim. This is something that is the result of pain, whether it's a big punch or a death by 1,000 cuts. And everyone needs, you just need to be patient with people so that they understand what's involved. I think not knowing, it's the unknown. We are so afraid of the unknown that it holds us back from doing what we know sometimes is what we need to be doing, right?
Yeah, we know the known. Okay, I can put up with this verbal abuse.
It's familiar. It's the familiar.
Yeah. And there are many kinds of manipulation. So tell us a little bit about your book. Why did you write it? And tell us a little bit about it. What would somebody get out of it?
Yeah, so I'm trying to get my message out. And one of my marketing team experts told me, you know what? You should break up my first book, Solve the Divorce Dilemma. Do you keep your husband or do you post him on Craigslist?
I love that title.
So he said, you know what? You should break this up in booklets that, you can share with people. And I would start with domestic violence. And I said, that's a great idea. So I went back to my book and I didn't have that much about it. My books are geared, with the domestic violence survivor in mind, because I understand that was for me the hardest thing, was that struggle of making that decision to end the relationship and carrying it out. So I figured, you know what, I should put a little bit more information here. So that's how I decided to write Stop the Hurt, so that it could be a resource that could help someone identify the signs of domestic abuse and be able to have some information that would help them plan a safe escape and move forward, as well as help others identify the signs so that they could help someone who is in, or they suspect is in, an abusive relationship break free from abuse.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, and Lydia is appreciative that you put it in Spanish.
De nada.
What about dealing with verbally abusive in-laws and spouse when you have young children?
I think you should get counseling. I think I'm a huge believer in getting help. And I would work with a therapist or a counselor because it might erode your self-esteem. And you need to learn how to deal with these situations in ways that are productive and that empower you, as opposed to giving in for the sake of domestic peace or getting carried into reactivity and making a bad situation worse.
What would you say about this? How could somebody be so confident at work and doing such a wonderful job at work and putting up with that at home?
I think we all have our areas where, and our partners, the abusive partner is an expert at finding your weak points and then using them against you. So it's not uncommon for someone. In fact, one of my partners in giving a talk she was an executive, and she had a partner who completely mistreated her and beat her up in public, literally physically abuse her in public. So they know what your weak points are, whether it's your appearance or your self-confidence, whatever aspect of your personality is the weakest, that they, where they can really get under your skin. That's what they do. And you are a strong person. You are capable you're fully equipped to live a wonderful life. We need to understand that these behaviors are not appropriate and that we have the right to live a life that is free from abuse, regardless of what other people think.
Yeah. I know somebody, I'm not going to say who or anything, but the abusive partner killed their dog.
That's awful.
And they lied about it and didn't leave right away. So I'm sure you've seen stuff like that.
You hear about it all the time. And that's one of the things they do, even if they don't physically harm you, just threatening to do harm to children and pets. That is domestic abuse. And some experts would qualify it as violence, because the threat, the intimidation that is the result of that, violent behavior towards children or pets is considered violence.
Yeah. What's the life like? We've talked about it a little bit, but of a victim of abuse, like what are the things that are going through their mind and a typical day?
I think feelings of, it's very common for domestic abuse victims to feel despair, depression, and anxiety. I think the predominant theme that would be going on in their minds is like, what's wrong with me? Or why is this happening? What am I doing wrong? What's wrong with me? I think self-blame is something that is running in the background, because very often abusers make you feel like you are wrong. Something is wrong with you. They are perfect. You're overly reactive, or you're emotionally defective. So there's probably a lot of self-doubt and which is so harmful. Because
really
we need to identify where it's coming from. Is it coming from somebody else? Because nobody can define you, and nobody can harm you if emotionally, unless you give them that permission. So you need to empower yourself to claim your right to be free from abuse, to be living in self-expression, because we're here to be us.
Yeah.
And nobody has a right to suppress who we are. And that's what abusers do. Break your spirit so you can't be yourself, so you can't function as you're supposed to.
You're the devastating one that needs counseling. If you had loaded the dishwasher right, I wouldn't have yelled at you. If you hadn't had our son's pacifier in the trunk when we're driving down the road.
Yeah. I mean, do you really do that? I mean, it's just ridiculous. But that's what they try to make us think.
Yeah.
And we buy into it because we're so rattled and so upset by what they're saying and doing that we can't really see clearly. So it's good to step back and say, wait a minute, is this really how you treat a partner? Is this the way you treat someone you love over something as stupid as the pacifier? Pull over and get the pacifier out of the back.
Yeah.
you know? And the funny thing about abusers is that they can get away with it, and they do it, but they typically don't do that. Would they treat their boss that way, or their
Mhm.
mother, or their sister?
Yeah.
So it's a partner centered behavior, and it's not okay. And you need to do the inventory to think about what is and what is not appropriate, what is and what is not a loving behavior, because that's what it boils down to.
Right.
Is this an unloving behavior? Because you deserve to be loved as you are.
Yeah.
And no matter what your partner says and does to you, you're still loving and lovable, and you deserve to be happy.
Yep. So I can't tell who's posting this because it says LinkedIn user, but oh my gosh, yes. What if your weak point is your young child?
Get help. I would suggest go to a domestic violence agency and try to get help. And they can put you in touch with whatever resources are available in your community, and identify the behaviors. If these behaviors put the child in danger,
Mm-hmm.
then you might have some avenues for relief through the court system.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
get help. You don't have to do this alone. Don't go it alone. There's
Yeah,
help out there.
definitely. Hi, Charlene. Thank you for joining us. And I remember when Sonia, when you reached out to me, I'm like, I really want to do this. That's why I wanted to have this episode not on my normal night because I was booked, but I wanted to do it before the holidays. Because what are you seeing in terms of domestic violence and abuse around holidays? What are some trends?
Surprisingly, and I always had this notion that during the holidays it escalates, but the statistics don't say that. However, it's counterintuitive, but the holidays are very stressful, and there's more opportunity for conflict, and we're more stressed out, and so there's also more opportunity for reactivity.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is really a good time to talk about that.
Yeah. And what have you seen during the COVID crisis with respect to domestic violence and abuse?
It has skyrocketed.
Yeah.
And the reason why, isolation, like I said, is the power tool of the abuser. So especially during the lockdown, when we were isolated from our support systems and the systems, the things that bring relief to us, both the abuser and the victim. So we don't have that available. There might be added stress coming from the financial situations that resulted from COVID, not being able to work, less income potentially coming in. So it was breeding ground for domestic violence, and the agencies were really being taxed during this period for that reason.
Yeah. What do you say to somebody who, Charlene says so many suffer in silence with this? Yes, that's definitely true. And what would you say to somebody who wants to leave but can't afford an attorney?
You don't need an attorney to leave an abusive relationship. I mean, if you're talking divorce, first of all, make that stop at the domestic violence agency, and they can tell you what's available in your community. There might be, I know that in New Jersey, where I practice, there is the Volunteer Lawyers for Justice who can help you. There's also the Legal Services of New Jersey can help you represent yourself, and they have amazing resources that you can just download, and it walks you through the process. Or there might be a law clinic in your local law school that might be able to help you, might have some law students who can guide you through the process. So do the investigation. Don't feel like you're stuck just because you don't have the resources to hire an attorney. Make that appointment and get help.
When you're involved in something like this, and it's maybe financial or even physical, but you don't have the proof right away when you're trying to go get help, or if it's the verbal and you think you're going crazy, you don't have proof. I mean, what kind of evidence do you need in order to get out?
Well, in order to get out, you need to decide you want to get out. So work first on yourself. Because to me, the most important part of this whole journey is empowering yourself to make that decision, to make that determination that you deserve to be happy, and that you will not tolerate these behaviors, and that you will end the relationship. You don't have to get a divorce to end a domestic violence situation. Get help through, like I did, through a therapist to help you get to that point. And then of course the domestic violence agencies that can help you identify what's going on in your relationship and what you can do. They can help you plan a safe escape, because safety is very important.
Yeah.
You know, if you are in physical danger, do whatever it takes to get you out safely. Start preparing. This is something that, you know, if you have to run for your life, do. But if you're not in a dangerous situation, start preparing yourself. Start putting money aside. Start creating a plan, you know, putting a package of whatever you need, your essentials to get out. Have a plan how you're going to get out, where you're going to go. Because if you don't have that in place, actually carrying out the exit is going to be very difficult, and may get all botched, and you may end up back with the abuser, right?
Yeah,
So
definitely.
plan it. It's be strategic about it.
Yeah. Heidi says some abusers seem to take pleasure in perverse pleasure in saying inappropriate and hateful things about others, like the unrest over the past year, things that they know you don't like. They do.
They
And
do.
and I would say we can choose how we react to that, and if we want to put up with it or not. And those are things that I didn't do back then, but I would now.
Right. You know, it's that button. You know, it's like when you push a button, if there's no wire attached to it, it's not going to do what what it normally would, right?
Yeah, that's true. DJ says this is so important and deserves attention. Got to be here and support these conversations. Yes, thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah. James says one song that sticks out to me about this subject is, do you know this song, Not Falling? No, I don't know that either. I'm going to have to look it up, James.
I'll look it up too.
How do you plan an exit with children? I can tell you how I did it. And
yes.
Then all right, how I did it. It wasn't financial abuse. It was just that he let me, manage the finances. So I ended up going to an attorney, and the one thing that I was concerned about was he kept saying, you can't take the kids. You can't take the kids. I mean, I was sleeping in a separate bedroom. I mean, we knew we weren't getting along. His mom even said, why don't you stay? I did. And I said, because I don't want to be like you. But then once I left, she was not on my side really. So it's very hard on the family, but my kids were 7 and 4. And I rented a house right down the street because I took my kids to psychiatrists, and especially my son, because he was kind of acting out in school, and he was the 7-year-old, and the psychiatrist evaluated them and basically said, that they recommended that I move out and that the kids go with me, but that I live close by so the kids could still see their dad. And initially when we separated, he wasn't able to get them the normal every other weekend for 2 days. It was, we gradually went back built into that. But so I rented this house down the street for like 3 months before I moved in. So the neighbors were like, one neighbor I confided in and she knew, but everyone else is like, I wonder who's living in that house. Who's moving into that house? Who's moving into that house? And finally, I got all the ducks in a row with the attorney and stuff. Now, maybe I could have done it differently. Maybe I could have left, but he went and saw the psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist that was seeing my son said, well, why are you staying? So he kind of convinced him that he was miserable too. And what's the purpose? So that helped. And then I knew he was taking over a job where he was responsible for a nationwide organization, and he had his first meeting in another state. And so I planned the movers to come that day. And I told him the night before that I wanted to separate. The movers are coming. And I was scared. I didn't know how he would react at all. I mean, your mind can play a lot of tricks on you, or maybe if it's not tricks, and tell you what would happen. He had a gun. I've never seen him use a gun, but I didn't know. I was scared. But I was very fortunate. We wrote a separation agreement, and he's like, well, you may as well take that and that. And then we told the kids together. I moved down the street. We never had to go to court. We pretty much worked things. The big issue was money and child support, but we worked it all out. So I was really, really, really fortunate. But it took some planning, because I don't know, what do you have? They were telling me I had to worry about like taking the kids away from their dad or something, because it was verbal abuse. I didn't have like proof.
Right. And you know what? It's funny because, verbal abuse and psychological abuse, certain things, they just don't meet the threshold that the laws may have in your state. So it's not like you can get a restraining order for that, but you still need to, move on in the relationship for your sanity sometimes. So you need to plan, you need to be very strategic about it, and you need to plan. And like you said, you took the time to plan this, over a period of months. So work with someone, and you're going to need a support team. You're going to need people on your side who are going to help you carry out this decision, and consult with an attorney if there's children involved, because there's going to be some legal issues, and they vary from state to state. So you want to get the right scoop on how to proceed. So yes, I suggest you talk both to a therapist and to an attorney, and by all means, your local domestic violence agency. But I have a story for you on how a friend of mine, her mom did it, and it's really funny because when I met her, she says, "Do you have money aside that your husband doesn't know about?" Right? And she told me that her father totally abused her mother in front of the children. It was really like a dangerous man. And one day he went to work, and she said to the kids, "All right, kids, let's back up. We're out of here." And when he returned from work, they were gone.
Wow. Yeah. Well, and then the kids went, I can't remember what month that was. It was October. And the following summer, the kids were at summer camp. Maybe it was 2 summers later. And I thought about getting back together with him. I didn't.
Good for you.
But yeah, we went on a few like dates or stuff, and it's like, no, I didn't do it. But we were able to take a trip together to Disney World with the kids. So we tried to, not have it impact the kids as much, but there were definitely times when like the kids didn't want to go over to their dads, and that's always hard. And then, he passed away 2 years ago on December 11th, and that date's coming up. And so then all these emotions come up, all these conflicting emotions, like, how could I love somebody who was so nasty to me, but he was my kid's dad? And I think because I can look at him with compassion and see why he was that way, because of the way he was raised and things like that. So I have compassion for him. I didn't have as much for me, which is something that I've really worked on over the past couple of years. So now I have it for me too.
Yeah, that's key. Self-love is so important, because you can't expect anyone to love you fully the way you're supposed to be loved if you don't feel that way towards yourself.
Yeah. Heidi says, my father would say, hide your launch buttons. And James posted the link to the song, so we can check that out later.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, James.
DJ says, yeah, wow, Emily, every time I listen to you, every time you listen to me, I drop something else that you never knew about me. I'll say something else. Okay. I said this on Dorothy Ann's podcast the other night. I know why I had that self-esteem issue that enabled me to put up with it. And that's because I had been married once before and I wasn't faithful. And so I have never been unfaithful again. And that impacted my self-esteem, I think, and made me feel like I deserved to be treated that way by him.
Yeah, so that's why reflection is so important.
Yeah. And support is key for sure.
Yes.
And James says, my biological father was verbally abusive. Yeah. And then someone says, psychologically abused by in-laws, and spouse. And it scares me because of my young child. Sometimes I think of staying just for my son and tolerating it. No, I would.
No, don't do that. No, no, no.
I left when my son was 7, and I'm not saying that he's an alcoholic because I stayed that long, but he had those tendencies. You know, he was always got addicted to. If I have the next, I've talked to him about this. If I have the next Pokemon card, it's going to have the rare one in it. So he had that addictive tendency. I even told him, you know, don't start smoking, don't start drinking. You've got alcoholism on both sides of your family. His dad was an alcoholic. So I'm not saying that that's what will happen to your son, but I mean, it impacts the kids.
It
They
does.
see it. They know more than you think they know. My son, when he went to the psychiatrist, said at age 6, Dad, he was counting the number of beer cans in the trash in the garage. I didn't
Oh
know
my
that.
God. Whoa.
I didn't know that. And then he said, well, why can't Dad move to Texas? They have rodeos. He likes rodeos. You know, they know more than you think.
They do. They're very perceptive. And even if you don't fight in front of them, they can pick up on the tension.
Oh, yeah.
And they pick up on the abuse. And it's really funny because one of my readers told me that it was her grown children. She divorced in her 60s. And she told me it was her adult children who said to her, Mom, you don't have to put up with it. And so she divorced him, and now she's very happy with a new partner. So for those of you who think you've been putting up with this for a long time, you might as well go on. There is life at any age. You deserve to be happy at any age, and you can be happy at any age.
Yes. And I can have conversations about this with my adult children. You know, he's still their dad, right?
Yes.
Or he passed away, but you know, they know that I talk like this, and they know how their dad was. They get it. And he's still their father. So I really, you know, I tell my story though. I feel like that's important. So here's a question. Is it necessary to be hit or abused verbally? The most painful is when everyone thinks that person is not capable to hurt us, but they don't know we're suffering a lot.
That's right. It's those invisible wounds that are most painful. And it makes you feel all the more isolated, you know, because you have this charming person. Everybody thinks you're with a catch, right? And you know, it's funny for me, my grandmother would say to me, oh, you can tell he loves you a lot. Or, oh, but he brings you flowers, right?
Yeah.
You know, and it was until someone said to me, you can buy your own flowers. Right. And that is like, that's what really clicked in my head. You know, I can buy my own flowers and I don't have to be with him because he buys me flowers. Right.
You
Or
buy your
because
own
he has.
ring. I bought this ring for myself. I gave it to me.
Yeah. I have gotten myself a lot of those things because you know what? You owe it to yourself. And it's you deserve to be happy. And it doesn't matter if they're charming and everybody thinks they're wonderful. When they're not wonderful to you, you owe it to yourself to be treated with respect and love. That's what relationships are supposed to be about.
Yeah. This LinkedIn user says, Lygia, I feel so seen by your post. I feel like this all the time. And that's exactly what happens, Sonia.
Absolutely. And you know, one thing that I want to point out is that the abusive behavior is passed on from male to male. So if you have a male child and he observes the abuse, if he observes the mother being abused, he's very likely to abuse his female partner when he is an adult. And likewise, if a child, especially an adolescent child, sees the mother being abused by the father, it's very disempowering to them because they think they want to help the mother, they want to intervene, and it puts a child in a terrible place. So keep that in mind. It's not only possibly creating an abuser out of your child in the future, but it's also creating a disempowered man as well.
Yeah. I am so grateful that my son became sober, and he is an awesome father. Now, he does sometimes catch him. He'll say sometimes, and even my daughter, sometimes they catch themselves leaning towards the tendencies of their dad. And a lot of it, I think, was their dad had anxiety. But back then we didn't have that term, and I guess it was in the early to mid 90s. And even I think I knew that. And I would say, why don't you just, if you take a pill, like an anti-anxiety pill, or get help, that would help. But he would not do that. But my kids are good at noticing those tendencies sometimes in themselves and catching themselves. And
Good.
I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful. And my son has been sober for 5 years. He's just doing awesome. And my kids and I have a really close relationship, and I'm really grateful for that. So much to be grateful for. Yeah. So, oh no, that's all I needed. Raising someone else's future husband. Yes, you are.
Yes, you are. That's what my mom always said, you have to be a good husband. And she taught my brother how to cook and how to, do laundry and all kinds of things. That's the spirit. And my brother never got married, by the way.
Well, you're raising someone else's daughter. So,
That's right.
The daughter sees the mom and sees what she's puts up with. And, it can be subtle, and you think your kids aren't noticing, but they are.
Right. And the other thing is you could be normalizing a behavior that is simply not acceptable. And I think that's one of the reasons why domestic abuse is so pervasive, because we grow up with all these messages that certain behaviors are okay when in fact they're not.
In fact, they're not. So, yeah.
Yes, I love to hear from listeners. So feel free to send me an email and reach out to me.
Yeah. I mean, it's so good to get feedback. I mean, sometimes I never know like who's listening, or you can see people now that are watching. And I really appreciate people coming on and submitting comments and watching. And then, sometimes people are listening to the audio version, because in a few months, this will be published as a regular podcast, and you just never know who's listening. I've been to conferences and someone said, "Oh, I heard that episode." And it's just so cool. And so reach out and let us know that you watched it and you listened and you learned something and you appreciate it, because that means a lot to us. Yeah.
Yes. And Ligia, I'll send you the Spanish one. Just reach out to me.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, you pronounced her name correctly. we always say Ligia, but it's, how do you say it again?
Ligia.
Yeah, Ligia. Yeah, there you go. Well, do you have any closing words of advice?
Guys, you deserve to be happy. And it's a very difficult situation. It looks so dark and it feels hopeless, but there's help out there. Just get it and build your life back. For me, I never imagined that my life could be better. I just thought it was over because I was in this relationship, and now I just have a charmed life with a new husband. We've been together for 22 years, 15 married, and you never know what life has in store for you. Just be open to dreaming and making it happen, regardless of the abuse you're experiencing now.
I love that. So here's one more question. What if your spouse allows his family to verbally abuse you?
You need to say it's not acceptable and see if he doesn't support you. You may want to rethink whether or not you want to continue a relationship where you are not being respected. Mm-hmm. And if you have children, they're going to learn to disrespect you as well. So it's setting you up for a lifetime of disrespect.
They can go to your website. You see, you've got this other book called "Do You Keep Your Husband or Do You Post Him on Craigslist?" But really, it's what's the book about? You want to tell us quickly, because
yes,
yeah.
Let's see. I'm not very good with a camera, so this is the book, and it's for for women. I wrote this book for women who are considering divorce and are struggling with a divorce decision, and it's a roadmap to making that decision, examining your relationship, how you ended up in this place. And so use that clarity to decide what to do next and how you can rebuild your life, whether you stay with your husband or you move forward with a divorce. And I wrote a gender neutral version that's called Relationship Solutions, that is both for men and women, and couples can use together. And if their relationship is not abusive and they are in a place where they think they can work things out, or at least get some clarity, because sometimes you can realize that, you know what, you may love each other, but you're not meant to be together. You can make that decision from a point of power and create the life you deserve, regardless, in a relationship or alone.
Well, thank you so much for being on the Onward podcast. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. I'm going live again on Wednesday night, and I've got that advertised. If you the link, let me know. But basically, just come live on Wednesday night on my LinkedIn profile at 7:30. That's when that show is, and we'll be talking about life and creating a life that you love living and how to do it. So. Yes, we helped you a lot. I'm glad we did. Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening.
The Onward podcast is sponsored by Emily Harmon Coaching and Consulting. Visit my website, emilyharmon.com, to learn more about my coaching programs and how you can work with me. Let's move onward together.